Please welcome back to the stage, Shannon Colbert.
Hi, everyone, we're here. We've made it. So I'm pleased to open up the Margaret Davidson Emerging Leaders Roundtable focused on climate innovations. Bold and unconventional solutions are needed in order to spark global action for climate change. And we must embrace new technologies, we must fuel pioneering thinking, and we must catalyze climate investments that break beyond the constraints of our current systems and our processes. It's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Littlejohn, the Acting Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs with the U.S. State Department. Assistant Secretary Littlejohn provides leadership, diplomacy, and scientific cooperation to conserve and protect our global environment. The ocean, the health of our ocean and our planet, as well as space, so it covers quite a lot. And she wants to make sure that she does that in order to look at both prosperity, peace, and security for all of our future generations. I could not think of a better person to provide opening remarks to this amazing session that we have in front of us. And with that, I would like to have you all join me in introducing and welcoming Assistant Secretary Littlejohn.
Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here. I would ask you, hasn't this been an inspiring 2 days, right? I would like to thank, frankly, the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation for organizing another successful CHOW. This is actually my first, and bringing us together in person and online. It is my honor to introduce the final group of speakers at Capitol Hill Oceans Week. And this is, frankly, a special panel, one convened in honor of Margaret Davidson, known to many of you, who spent much of her life working on these issues, bringing people together, and focusing on the future. Today's panel is very much focused on the future, as each of our panelists is working right now to combat threats to the health of our ocean. This is also a good time for us to ask some important questions. Should we be pessimistic or optimistic about the future of the ocean? What about our ability to mitigate the stressors that threaten our ocean? Or our ability to combat climate change? The challenges are enormous, but the solutions are all around us. When I see this group of young leaders and innovators who have plans to do so much, who have already done so much, I am optimistic. They are taking bold, creative steps to address climate impacts on our ocean, from food science to carbon capture technology to grassroots community advocacy. And now, that doesn't mean we can all sit back and relax. On the contrary, these young leaders remind us that the future really is up to us. If we do not come together and act now, it might be too late. As a diplomat, I am often confronted with foreign perceptions of our country, and I can tell you that this group, just like Margaret Davidson, embodies what people around the world respect about the United States and admire about the United States. And that is the willingness to try something new, to collaborate in new ways, to be persistent, and to be unafraid to take risks and innovate. And I'm sure that also includes a lot of long hours. But this is the America that other countries look to for leadership. This is the America that they want to partner with. This is the America that helps us to have faith in our future, in our country, and in ourselves. Of course, no pressure for the young people, guys. No. But seriously, they make our job easier. And people like them, and people like you, are what America is really bringing to the table to tackle the challenges of our time. The American story is one of innovation, persistence, and leadership. The United States and the Department of State are here to support the young leaders and innovators that embody these values. And this is our moment. This is the decade where we leave a more sustainable future for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, and everyone. To achieve this important goal, it will take the innovation and passion, creativity and optimism represented by the young people that will join this stage today. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty much really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to the moderator, Shannon, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Littlejohn. It seemed fitting to end our Capitol Hill Ocean Week conference with some trailblazers, with people who are our future. The Margaret Davidson Emerging Leaders Roundtable has always brought together leaders, pioneers, and this year we are very proud to be able to bring together climate disruptors, innovation accelerators, and wave makers in order to make a difference for our ocean. This is our future. The moderator for this session, Dr. Justin Dunnavant, is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at UCLA. He's also the co-founder of the Society for Black Archaeologists. As a National Geographic Explorer in Residence and regular participant in Diving with a Purpose's Maritime Archaeology training program, Justin uncovers the truths about our collective history through maritime archaeology, looking at our past in order to help shape our future. And that curiosity has always inspired him to explore the depths of human history and heritage. And I think every one of our leaders here has their own story to tell and bring forward. And so I'm proud to say, Justin and our panel, please come up.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us at this time on this panel. I can tell you now we are all excited to be here. I'm excited to be here amongst a group of emerging leaders in this field that are using creative and innovative techniques, styles, and bringing new ideas into this area that we know as conservation, and more importantly, to this wider world of the ocean. With that said, before we begin, Hermina Glasshill has offered to pour libations for us and to, again, welcome our collective ancestors into this space. And with that, I say thank you and offer you the time. Thank you.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the waters. Join me. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the waters. Libations is about remembering our ancestors, remembering those who came before us, and it is a return. It begins with water because water is the beginning of life. Water is essential to everything that is alive. And so with that, I'm going to pour life into life, and I'm going to honor our ancestors, ourselves, and the future. I'd like to begin by honoring my ancestors, who were the best of the best from Africa. I am a part of that royalty that was on those ships. I am a part of that wider piece of humanity that endured the transoceanic slavery. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. Together, Ashe.
Ashe.
I want to honor all of you. Wading in the water is about self-determination to be free. And it's also based on a scripture in New Testament Bible that an angel of God appeared at the pool of Bethesda to heal a paralyzed man. The angel stirred the water, disrupted the water, was an innovator, and the man was healed. Isn't that what we want to do with the ocean? We want to heal the ocean. So we honor ourselves when we honor this planet, and we certainly honor everything that's in the ocean. Ashe.
Ashe.
And we want to honor those that are yet to be born, the species of marine life that is yet to be discovered. Ashe. Together 3 times. Ashe. 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 Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. All right. It's a powerful start to what will become a powerful panel. I just want to do brief names and titles of individuals, and then we can get into some deeper conversation. And I'm hoping that they can elaborate a little bit more on their life stories as we get deeper into the conversation and the questions. For those of you online, you can submit questions online through the portal. They will be coming to me throughout in physical form. There's magic technology that allows the words you type to enter on this table. For those of you in the audience, you can write your questions on the cards provided, and they will be passed up as well, and we can make sure to incorporate those as well. With that said, again, to my left, we have Hermina Glass-Hill, an interfaith leader, as well as a field representative with Oceana. We have Catherine Escalante, who is a youth conservation scholar as well. We've got Shannon Costantino Rausch, who is joining us as the Chief Strategy Officer for Finless. Finless, and I know Finless Foods has provided some of the food that we were able to enjoy over the course of the programming, so thank you for that as well. And then we have Jordan. Jordan Brainer is working currently with the organization that I'm going to read now because I know that they are working with Running Tide. And a lot of the work that they are doing with Running Tide is critically thinking about this connection between innovation and the ways in which we can actually bring science and technology into thinking creatively about this concept of conservation. So I'm excited to have you all here today with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And if we can kick off this conversation with a question, I'm going to target it actually to perhaps our most senior member, Catherine Escalante. We know that you are probably one of the younger members here.
Yeah.
And you have a sort of personal story that takes you from South Dakota.
Yep.
And I wanted to know, as a younger person who's in this conservation work dealing with the oceans from South Dakota and beyond, could you tell a little bit more about how you got into ocean conservation and what that means for you?
Yeah, of course. Well, I was born in Sessuntepeque, El Salvador, and my family migrated to the United States when I was 4 years old. And ever since, I have lived in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And if any one of you has ever gone to South Dakota, you know it's beautiful. And I was surrounded by nature and these beautiful sceneries, like the stuff you get on like the background of your phone type sceneries. And I grew a passion for the outdoors. And my family has always had a very spiritual connection to the outdoors. And as I made it through high school, I was lucky enough to get involved in a lot of different activities that got me involved in my community and that got me involved in the environment. And I was able to do a bunch of stuff. I was able to head an environmental caucus at our state capitol. I was able to engage with my community and learn about the issues in South Dakota. And I gained a passion for it, and I think a lot of our youth that I've been able to meet throughout the last couple of days here has this crazy, authentic passion that leads them to do these crazy, awesome things and be leaders in their community. And I'm so lucky to have had such great experiences in South Dakota with that. And now I'm a Yale Conservation Scholar, and I have been placed at the Ocean Project this summer, and I get to learn about ocean conservation issues specifically, which I'm thrilled about. I think coming from an inland state, the connection between us and the ocean might not be as obvious as some of the coastal areas that are most directly affected by ocean issues. But our connection is there nevertheless, and it's a strong one, whether it be through our agriculture in our state that heavily depends on the temperature, or whether it be through our rivers and our watersheds that connect somewhere and eventually impact the ocean. Our policy and the things that we do in our state still trickles down to the ocean, and that connection is there. And I know from a lot of the people that live in South Dakota, they have a really deep connection to the ocean. Even if they don't live right next to it, they experience it either by traveling or more close to home by kind of growing up near it and then coming to South Dakota and then kind of not having direct access. But I think that connection still very much so exists, and it's really great to be here and amplify that inland awareness and that inland connection, and kind of lend ourselves in that way.
Nice, thank you for that, thank you. And Jordan Brenner, I know with Running Tide, you all are dealing with kelp conservation, you all are also dealing with shellfish conservation, and talking about innovative technologies. And oftentimes we talk about nonprofit and sort of federal government, but we don't often talk about the idea of for-profit companies or just other companies in general and the ways in which they can get engaged in conservation. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, at Running Tide, we see our job as connecting capital to nature. And how do we bring new forms and new ways to invest in these natural systems? Someone gave me a stat recently that there's like $140 trillion of global GDP. First of all, that's a lot of money, but there's $140 trillion of global GDP committed to net zero, and like $9 trillion committed to nature, and they couldn't even give me an answer on how much is committed to the ocean. And part of that is the ocean is so complex and so interconnected. It's not any one individual system. And so how do you build the capability to invest in these natural systems and restore some of these natural systems? In many ways, the ocean health is in decline. So how do we restore these systems? And part of it is you have to have the technology, and you have to have the capability to understand what's happening in the ocean. And then if you can build the interventions like shellfish or kelp, how do you measure the impact and understand the impact both on the ecological impacts, socioeconomic impacts? If you're having a carbon impact, how do you understand and measure those things? And if you can do that effectively, you can start to bring in new capital into the space, and new money, and new investments, and new technologies, and new systems, which will just further expand our understanding of the ocean. So that's what's so exciting to me, right? It's like, how do we bring new energy and new peace to this space? And that's really fun.
Yeah, what sort of I don't want you to get in trouble now, but what sort of technologies are you most excited about in terms of this development space, if you could?
At Running Tide, we are very focused on both carbon removal and biodiversity investments. But what that really means is we're very focused on building the technology to understand what's happening in nature. Like, the way I think about it, right? We have this shellfish growing in this really super advanced shellfish reef with robotics and machine vision, but the shellfish doesn't know it's growing in the most technologically advanced shellfish operation in the world. It's just like growing and eating and having a good time. And same thing for our kelp operations. It doesn't know it's surrounded by a bunch of sensors and pH and salinity, and has a camera pointed at it that has machine vision attached to it to help us understand what's happening in the system. It's just growing and absorbing light and doing what it's supposed to do. And so to me, that's what our job is, to surround these natural systems with technology so we can better understand them, so we can find better ways to invest in them. And that's the fun part, right? It's like, sure, we grow kelp and we have delicious clams and oysters, but that's not the fun part. The fun part is how do you understand everything around it, right?
Yeah, these sort of natural bioengineers.
Exactly.
Yep, right for the study. Related to that, Shannon, I know you are in the food space, and your organization really emerged out of this desire to look at tuna more specifically. And I was wondering if you could tell a little bit more about the work that you all are doing and how tuna fish even came into the picture and where y'all are going. Yeah.
I'm not digressing, I promise. I was going back to who we are and how it connects, and I think we've had a little bit of this. I actually trained to work as an ocean lawyer. Specifically, always I was focused on global tuna. And I'm saying this because it's kind of framing the story, right? So I did a lot of work starting my career actually at NOAA, thank you NOAA, but working a lot abroad as well in the Western Indian Ocean, in Africa, Mozambique actually, thinking about how do we manage our tuna fisheries. And I feel like if you look at my career path, I often describe it as chasing impact. I promised people there was a thread. It wasn't haphazard. It was trying to figure out how can we do more. We saw these global challenges and policy was rising to the occasion, but I always felt like, are we going to meet the solutions in time? So I say that because the founding of Finless wasn't that different in that there was this entire new space. So Finless is an alternative seafood company, plant-based, but largely also cell-cultured, which is a new industry saying, can we take cells from animals, grow them out in facilities that in a lot of ways look like microbreweries and bioreactors, and produce animal protein without continual harvest from the natural environment, whether that's cattle or whether that's bluefin tuna, which in a lot of ways we still harvest like we traditionally have from the Roman times. And so there was this field growing out of this idea that we're seeing largely the demand for animal protein just going up and up and up. And today already, I think I heard the stat that the 6 largest years of protein consumption in the United States were the last 6 years. And that's not even the globe, right? And that's not even by 2050 or 2100. And so at the same time, we're facing this, like in the wild capture fisheries, arguably a leveling off. Aquaculture is coming to play a role in that, but tuna haven't been successfully aquacultured. And on the meat and protein side, or on the meat side of the protein portfolio, we're seeing more and more land use is needed, and will we have enough literal land to be able to produce the heads of cattle that we'll need for the future? A lot of the stats say no. So this field was born out of this idea that how do we feed the population and do so in a sustainable way, not only for today, but for tomorrow. And Finless, where was Finless in this? I think Finless was one of the first companies in the United States, but the first company in the world to say, well, if we're doing this field for beef, why can't we do it for seafood? And arguably so, the case is even more important because we're seeing, it's naturally harvested, and we sorry for the really bad pun, but there's only so many fish in the sea. So if we can do this technology for beef, why can't we do it for seafood? And where do we start? And I think we decided, well, bluefin is a great place. I think for many of you in the room, I don't need to describe the sustainability reason of why to start with bluefin. And for the policy folks, I also don't need to explain the historic management challenges with bluefin. But also on the business side, right, we're always, this is the job in an innovative tech startup to say, how do we also make the business case? And the business case is there because when you're scaling a brand new technology, one of the most challenging things you're doing is dropping the cost to reach commodity prices or the prices that consumers expect when they're going to purchase this item from a restaurant. And so that's where we started with bluefin. So that's kind of a little bit of a long journey, but I hope I brought you along with me, and I hope it makes more sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we're going to tap into that a little bit more as we get further into Q&A. And I want to bring in Hermina as well into the conversation, and this sort of pairing with the interfaith community and coastal communities, and one of my sort of interests is this idea of heritage and how it fits in. I know you've done some work in Gullah Geechee corridor and Gullah Geechee communities, and I found out, my family has Geechee connections to Yamasee, South Carolina. Yes. I was wondering, could you talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing?
Yes, I am a historian first and foremost, as well as a faith leader, and I bring these experiences into the conservation work that I do at Oceana. Hey, Oceana! I bring that into my work because it informs how I'm able to connect with stakeholders, to be able to listen to their concerns, as well as to connect with influencers and champions, grassroots champions, grass tops, and bring this information to them and understanding who their constituency is. Oftentimes on the coast and throughout the corridor, the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, which begins in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and ends in Jacksonville, Florida. So it covers the coastal counties inward 30 miles, all the way down to Florida. And engaging this community around history and heritage and the very, very natural resource that is crucial to their heritage and culture is the ocean. From food to jobs to living very close to the ocean. What I do at my work at Oceana is bring this information about ocean, marine biodiversity, about how the ocean is a climate regulator of our entire planet, and how do I break this down into not just simple science communication, but parlay it into everyday language which communities can understand. Climate change, that our world is heating, the waters are warming, and sea level rise, and how do you bring that into to understand in their lived experiences? They're still farmers, many are still fisher people, and certainly seafood is just central to their diet. So when we are advocating for policy to protect the ocean, protect marine biodiversity, protect fisheries, prevent plastic pollution and offshore drilling, our motto at Oceana is restoring the ocean's health, but also feeding people. And so inherently, if we are protecting the ocean in that way, we're protecting all people, but we certainly are protecting African American Gullah Geechee people by protecting the fisheries. That's central to their lives.
So bring this connection between community and conservation. Amazing. I guess community conservation is ocean conservation.
Yeah.
All right, we can write that down. Wanting to go back to Catherine's conversation, I'm wondering what sort of conservation work are you most excited about right now, and do you hope to engage with this Yale Conservation Scholars Program?
Yeah, right now I'm definitely in an era of my life that I'm learning just so much, like every single day, and this week has taught me so much. Every single day. I've been so humbled by the conversations that I've had with, fellow youth, my peers, but also from leaders in this space. And I feel like that answer changes every single day. Yesterday was biofuels. Today, that looks a little bit different, but I'm just excited about everything, and I'm excited to keep learning from all of you and all of the amazing disruptive work that all of you are doing. And
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I always tell my students, just figure out what it is that's out there for you to explore and really chase down every angle that you can until you get excited. And that brings it actually to Jordan. I know we had a conversation earlier about youth education and excitement. And I know people don't often think about companies as getting engaged in youth education, but I want to know if you could talk about that connection.
Yeah, it's so fun to go talk to what I consider young people. Sometimes maybe I'm considered a young person, but to people who are younger than myself, who are engaged on the issue. And how do you engage them on not just marine biology, but marine engineering, the technology side, and hey, there's actually a thing that we can do. We can invest in this space. There is a thing that we can go solve. We can, giving people a little bit of hope of a way that you can put your energy towards it. And mostly, they're looking at us being like, what can you do? Like, why aren't we solving the problem? Like, there are so many issues. This is our generation's gonna have to face it. And so going in and having that dialogue, having that communication, I'm excited to learn from you. But like, how do we learn from them? What do they want to see from us is part of that conversation, right? And how do we understand what the issues are driving them forward? Because when we come to this space, we're on the younger side of the conversation here, but this is really important to engage young people on how they look at the oceans. What does it mean to them? How does that community mean to them? And have that and bring that as a part of the conversation now, because historically, ocean issues have been very niche, right? And how do we expand it to bring more people into the room I think is a key part of our objective in the next 10 years, right?
Yeah, I'm even thinking about, growing up, I don't want to date myself, but I know in elementary school we had to write letters to President Clinton asking about rainforest conservation. And knowing back then I knew very little about rainforests, but I knew enough to put a couple words down and write about. And then of course, movies like Free Willy that introduce us to this whole concept of whales and this whole idea of orcas and that whole world. So it's definitely this interesting combination of how we can bring all these together. Yeah, I appreciate that. I wanted to go back to Finless a bit as well, and just try to dig a little deeper into this idea of this cell technology and this idea of technology really being a potential incubator for more ways to grapple or to tackle this concept, if you could.
Where do I start?
Yeah.
I mean, I think to go but kind of broad and then narrow, I guess. I don't actually know how I'd answer the question if you said what is my favorite technology. I think there's this assumption I would say ours, right? So don't ask her the question. Yeah. But I actually think I couldn't answer it because I think I'm the most excited by the fact that there are so many new innovative technologies. And the fact that we actually are moving into the space where here in this fora we are talking about innovative technology, because I was thinking about this in prep for this panel, and I actually truly feel that the solutions we're going to need for tomorrow, let's say, the greater tomorrow, like the greater challenges that we have to face, some are being created today. Well, some are already created, and we're scaling them up. And we're trying to say, okay, we've gotten the test bed, we've gotten the R&D, we've got the pilot, but let's scale it up. Some I think are literally being created now, and I think probably a majority maybe haven't even been created yet. They haven't been maybe thought of, they've not been innovated, they maybe haven't gotten their first seed funding. And so I think we have to broaden the conversation of what a solution looks like. And instead of spending more time saying what's in and what's out, and maybe kind of deciding that some things are not solutions, we have to say, like, learner's mind about it and say, okay, how do we build this out and treat this as experimentation? And if it doesn't work, we're still one step closer to the thing that could work. So going into cell technology, yeah, I think there's been a lot of cellular work that's been done for a long time. Our field is really interesting because I'm working with folks that I would have never thought that I was working with. I'm the minority. I'm working with cell biologists, tissue engineers, bioprocess engineers, like honestly a lot of folks that are moving from biomanufacturing and biotechnology, which this administration is really excited about. And this is a confluence of like marketers, environmental lawyers, cell biologists coming together around a mission to say, how do we feed the demand for the future, for today and tomorrow, in a way that meets the limits of the planet, particularly the ocean. And so what does that look like? It's a lot of folks in a lab working on cell lines and cell banks and figuring out how to optimize what the cells need to be happy and thrive. How do we produce them at scale? How do we largely know what the generation of today but tomorrow is going to demand from food? Taste, texture, like product specifications. How do we get folks to eat differently and think differently about food? So it's kind of any and all of the above. And I think a lot of the challenges and things we think about in our industry are things that you probably think about, things that other folks are thinking about in the future of food space. So we're just beginning to scratch the surface, really, on what we can do with what the future of our food system is going to look like tomorrow versus what it does today.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and I want to just relate to that. There was an audience question that kind of touches on this idea of these critical questions that are going to emerge as we get deeper into this. And one person was asking to understand the purpose. They understand the purpose behind cell growing, and the numbers of fish are dwindling. But what do you do about sort of carbon efficiency when you're dealing with these laboratory techniques? And is that something that you all are able to consider at the moment?
100%. So my title is Chief Strategy Officer, which means something different every day, which I love about it. So I oversee regulatory and like government relations. So regulatory, how do we work with the FDA, but also impact. A big central part of what we're doing is how do we ensure we're achieving the mission we've been founded to achieve. And so one of our earlier hires, even for a company our size, was the sustainability lead. already working on things like what are the standards for ESG reporting for a company that's in hyper-growth stage? How do we build the idea of energy efficiency into facilities we haven't even, like that we're designing now and we haven't even started to build? So really capitalizing on renewables and looking at how do you build production facilities where you've ingrained like LEED certification into the building, because I don't know if anyone here knows about like life cycle assessments or analyses. It's much better to build that into your planning versus trying to take a process that's already established and then figure out how to make it more efficient. So we've been treating it as like mission ground zero. How do we build like energy efficiency, water efficiency, and all of this into our industry from the beginning?
That's amazing. I want to kick it back to you, Hermina, as well, and ask this question about communities while we're also dealing with these, it seems like these ever-changing sort of concerns, and specifically about institution building. And I know that that's not necessarily in your bio, but I know you started a foundation, an institute in ecology, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and who it's named after.
Sure. In 2017, when I moved to the Georgia coast, I founded a nonprofit organization called the Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center. And the mission of the Institute is very simple. How do we connect Black people back to the land and back to the ocean as a way of understanding life on the coast, and also as a way of reconnecting our role? We all belong. Some have been excluded over time, but we all belong to this planet. The ocean belongs to all of us. It's not just conservationists and innovators, but it belongs to all of us, and that's what ocean justice is about. But Susie King Taylor was this freedom seeker who escaped slavery as a 13-year-old girl. She was educated, and she became a teacher after the war. She was African-American Gullah Geechee, and a very significant figure in that transition from slavery to freedom. Her family used natural herbs, elderberries, sassafras tea, all of these herbs. And this is a way of this kind of esoteric knowledge that is needed in terms of understanding the communities that we engage throughout the coastal communities, and certainly in the Southeast and Georgia, that understanding how this kind of information, it's qualitative research that I use to inform my work in ocean conservation. You know, what does it mean to reside close to the ocean yet don't understand what the ocean is? Because to me, the ocean has several meanings and layers of meanings. I talked about transoceanic slavery. That's one way of remembering my ancestors, but also as an advisory member of Gray's Reef National Marine Sanctuary, how do we pull all of what we know about the science? What do we know about advocacy? What do we know about education? And provide that level to communicate with all communities, but certainly Gullah Geechee communities. We understand, you know, that gap, that disparity, that historical disparity. We can go on and on talking about that, but there is this disparity in knowledge and understanding about the ocean and how it is beneficial. It can be beneficial to all of us. Connecting the ocean in that way, providing that kind of public education and engagement. I also conduct oral histories, and so those oral histories really inform what do people know about this. Here we have one of my favorite campaigns is our North Atlantic Right Whale campaign. Yay! right? So how, we live in the Southeast. Gray's Reef is, this marine sanctuary that's 22 square miles, and it's just off our coast, 19 miles off of our coast. These whales have been migrating from Canada and Nova Scotia to Southeast for quite millions of years, coming every November through April, and we don't understand what is happening in our ocean, in Gray's Reef, in the Southeast. But you have this glorious creature, this megafauna that comes to our coast every year, and we don't know, nobody knows about it. So Oceana teams with Whale Week, Gray's Reef, and other entities every November to provide that level of information and education to the greater community, and certainly to Gullah Geechee community, as they are still continue to be fisher people. And so that's how we bring that education in through the Susie King Taylor Institute.
I'm glad you're doing that work, and I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things, I study slavery through the transatlantic slave trade as well, through archaeology. And I got to the point where I started studying ocean current patterns to try to understand where enslaved Africans were escaping and going to other islands, and finding that a lot of them left St. Croix and went to Puerto Rico. And a lot of those currents are historic currents that Taino communities were using, that Kalinago communities were using. And so it really goes back to your point, where if we actually study the ocean, we study ourselves.
Absolutely. There are still these oceanic superhighways that whales take, that ships took. I have read a slave captain's ship manifest where sharks would follow the slave ships. And one instance, there was a whale that followed a ship. And so, how do we engage this kind of knowledge in protecting the ocean? So it's beneficial to us all, because I'm sure that there are people here who might not have ever heard of that before, or certainly the work that you do. So yeah, it's great.
No, thank you. Going on that piece, we have a question for Jordan and perhaps for others as well. And they say, engaging youth in the conversation is critically important. How do you inspire the youth through this physical engagement? You touched on it a bit. And their communities, and do you have any hands-on experiences that you've seen are really effective in getting young people interested in this conversation?
Yeah, so it's kind of weird. If you were to explain to 10-year-old version of me that I'd be working in oceans, I'd say you were crazy. I used to hate the ocean. I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan on a lake, and the ocean was smelly, it was weird, you felt salty when you went to it, there was things that were trying to eat you and sting you, I couldn't see my feet, it was scary. But it was just and now I spend all of my time trying to understand this thing that is so complex, and it's the center of our climate system, and it's so interesting, and it does connect us all. And you cannot understand what's happening with our world without understanding what's happening in the ocean. And so finding a way to communicate that and engage directly with people is the thing that I love the most now. When it comes to direct engagement with youth, one of the things that we do, which is kind of fun, is we actually have physical things that we build. We build sensors. We build this thing I call CO2D2. It looks like a Star Wars droid that floats in the ocean and takes pictures and helps us understand what's happening. And I get to talk about that and give it a cool name and go bring that and say, here's the cameras and here's the 3D image that renders off this cool image in the middle of the water. So we have fun tech stuff that we get to talk about. And then I get to talk about all the engineering work that goes behind the scenes and how that connects with, we have 15 PhDs on staff. And those 15 PhDs are working with engineers from SpaceX to build satellites in the ocean, right? And how those two disciplines are now interconnected in a thing to try to solve a problem. And that sort of interconnectedness is fun to go and engage with. So I can have our scientist talk and the SpaceX engineer talk. So that physical presence is really fun. And that, when you bring the physicalness of the ocean, because oftentimes it feels so remote and distant, and then that helps engage the mind and how you think about it. So that's one of the things I've learned a lot about. The second piece, so we work specifically with a community in Iceland. One of our main operations on carbon removal is based in Iceland. Akranes, former fishing community. What I mean by former fishing community is it lost its fishing quota. So this is a community that has, it's basically a 1,000-year-old fishing community. Fundamentally, their entire livelihood is built on going out to sea, engaging with that natural environment, and coming home. right? And they lost their fishing quota, and they have a fish meal processing facility that is empty. And so what do? Well, we're going and building a macroalgae facility in high tech. And then you have, we're engaging with the local football community, soccer community, whatever you want to call it. We're engaging with the mayors and the fishermen community. It's like, how do we translate carbon removal in the open ocean to what their whole lives have been built around? Right? How do you have that conversation in a way that they can understand? Sometimes staying away from the science. Someone's just talking about what it means to them, right? And talking about what their kids' lives are going to be like and what the future of Iceland's going to be like. And that's the fun thing about being an entrepreneur is you believe the world can change, right? And you get to talk about how you think the world's going to change, and then you get to have that conversation with people and try to convince them that they believe that too. And so that's engaging in that way with communities and bringing energy is part of just, it's the joy of this work, really.
Yeah. Has anybody else had experience?
Sure. So we partner with Whale Week and the Tybee Island Marine Science Center in bringing kids in a program called Sidewalk to the Sea. These are inner city students, Title I schools. We bring them to Tybee Island Marine Science Center. This is the Susie King Taylor Institute collaborating with all of these. Bring these kids to Tybee Island Marine Science Center and then take them exploring on the ocean with a local charter boat company who understands, this real relationship with the ocean. Many times there are kids whose parents are third and fourth generation, live in Savannah or in Midway or in Brunswick or on St. Simon's Island who have never gone out on the sea. And so we take these kids out on boats. They get to see dolphins and sea turtles and all of that. And it opens up the sense of imagination that, gee, I am connected to all of this. I'm this close and I can be this connected whenever I want to. So that's part of the work that we've been doing and connecting ocean conservation education, also through Gray's Reef National Marine Sanctuary. There's the new Ocean Discovery Center at Gray's Reef, and we're so happy about that. There are exhibits. There's going to be this really interactive presentation for kids to come into the space and really get a deeper understanding about the ocean and this wonderful resource, particularly Gray's Reef, that's off of the Georgia coast.
Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll hop in as well. I have so much to say on this. I think there's so many parts to this. One, I think it is incredible as a young person to know that there are people in positions of power that are listening, and that there are people interested in my voice, and that there are people interested in what I have to say about any issue, or what a young person has to say about an issue. And I think for a lot of youth, it's really important to know that someone is listening, and being able to engage in a community, engage with young people and tell them that, and then flag them as leaders in their spaces and telling them that they are, the legacy, because that's what we are. We are the legacy of the policy decisions. We are the legacy of the action or the inaction that happens today. We are the ones that are going to inherit our oceans and the state of our oceans. And we are, as that, key people in this conversation, because we're going to be the ones that hopefully will be building on all this amazing work in the future. And I think just identifying young people as the key stakeholders that we are is a wonderful step in the right direction. But I also think there are a lot of other practical steps that we should be taking. I know my generation communicates through social media. That's my experience, is also with a background in social media. And I think a lot of organizations are doing an incredible job with outreach on social media and online, and leveraging the tools and the interconnection that we have for the very first time. And I know the Ocean Project does amazing stuff with that, especially with our Youth Advisory Council that spans everywhere from Norway to South Africa to the United States to, it's a global initiative. And getting people together in a room and explaining how they're all connected, and us seeing each other and learning from each other, and getting our experiences out there and hearing other people's experiences and our connection to the ocean is extremely motivating. And having groups that are interested in ocean conservation come in and do that and be able to bring people from completely different walks of life, especially young people, together is definitely a way to create lifelong leaders. And I think that's definitely a tool that we can leverage. I also think more specifically with social media, I've been telling a lot of people this, but the Mystic Aquarium's TikTok is off the charts. Like literally off the charts. Every single video goes absolutely viral, and I cannot tell you how much I've heard of that. Even before I really joined the ocean conservation space, I knew about Mystic Aquarium. And it's because they're reaching millions and millions of people, and they're telling people about their educational programs, even if not directly. They're linking themselves onto people's For You pages and telling themselves and branding themselves in such an incredible way, and then being able to tap communities that they would have never reached without, this kind of weird kind of algorithm thing. But I think social media is such an incredible tool that we can use to bring young people together and interconnect them. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you want to take it? No pressure.
I guess the thing I'll just mention is the things I pulled from here. I mean, one, we need to have a panel next year on how to go viral. That's like a takeaway for me. But I would say, to the point of, I think there's a lot of conversation about inheriting. Like, we're going to be inheriting. And I'm like, we are already inheriting. Like, these challenges have been put, in some ways, the snowball started rolling many years, decades ago, and we're already inheriting these challenges. So I think it's also moving the future to the present, because I think that changes things in people's minds, that we're already seeing those impacts. I mean, we all know, and I don't want to be that bring up the thing we're all talking about, but we're seeing the fires, right? And the East Coast, I'm from California, so it's interesting to see now this part of the country experience what has become quite a norm for us. And I was like, oh, there's fires, grab out my mask, right? And it's sad that I'm so socialized to it, but I think that's already an example of what we're experiencing today. It's not only about talking about the future. And I think the other thing I really want to point out, just because I'm sure you have this experience, we have this experience, or maybe you all have this experience, we don't have to seek out the youth to say, hey, do you want to learn about this thing? They seek us out. Like, the amount of inbound, like our company, but even me personally, gets from youth saying, how do I get an internship in high school on the Hill? And I'm like scrolling away trying to find these opportunities for folks. There's already such an appetite, and I think from the industry perspective, this is the future consumer. So figuring out, when folks are already in that age excited about the future of food, they already don't, this is not the food system that they want to see, and they've already expressed that. It's trying to figure out, how do we meet where the youth are already setting the stage for us of where we're gonna go, and how do we start that collaboration now, just to sort of speed up the process to the future.
Yeah.
Can I add? Yeah. Okay. I definitely think you're right, and it's so amazing seeing like very young, motivated people reach out to NGOs or companies for these experiences. But I also think there's a lot to be said about reaching out to like non-traditional partnerships within young people. Like, I come from South Dakota. I am a first-generation immigrant. Like, I'm probably not the person that is traditionally in the ocean conservation space, and the people that are going to be reaching out are most likely people that have traditionally been in the ocean conservation space. So I think there's also kind of a burden for organizations to reach out and make the non-traditional partnerships and be able to, transcend the typical person that is in this space and open that up and make the connection between all these different people that are connected to the ocean, but might just need a couple more lines connected to them specifically in order to really be invested as much as, we all need to be in this conversation. So I think I would just really encourage, anyone that wants to get young people involved, get different young people involved, and get all young people involved. Don't get different young people involved, get all young people involved.
Catherine, I don't know if you have ESPN, as they say, but can you comment on the consideration of accessibility and how it plays into your work? We just got this question, so.
Yeah, I mean, I told the story earlier, but my mother grew up in El Salvador. She was born in Honduras, but she grew up in El Salvador, and she grew up right next to the coast, and she has this amazing connection to the ocean. And I grew up hearing about it more in storytelling. My family is a family of storytellers. And I always grew up hearing about her ocean experiences. And since we've been in the States, she has not really gotten to travel outside of our regional kind of South Dakota area. And for the first time, just 3 weeks ago, she saw the beach for the first time in 17 years. And it was the most beautiful experience. I've never seen my mom so happy. And like, as a daughter, that makes my heart so happy. And I think a lot of communities, especially low-income communities, immigrant communities that have had exposure to the coast in, the places where they were originally come from and coming to the States, not necessarily always having that access, whether it be because, if you live in a coast area, there's a lot of like privatization going on in these beaches that kind of limits local access to spaces like that, or whether it be if you're in South Dakota and don't have, the funds to necessarily travel all the way to Florida or any of the coast and kind of access it like that. There's so many barriers to these beautiful spaces, but there shouldn't be, because we all have those connections to the ocean. We all deserve to be able to look out and take in the beauty of it and have that happiness. And it was just so wonderful seeing that and getting to have that experience with my mom. And I know she viewed it as such a transformational experience, such a spiritual experience. There's so many cultural connections to that. There's so many like heritage type connections to that. And I know there's a really awesome organization that I had the pleasure to speak to that, had been getting people to, again, from inland states, getting people to travel out to the coast and be able to experience that for the first time. And it's transformational experiences like that again, make lifelong investors in a space like this. And I think that's incredible, and I think we should be broadening our access in every single way and reaching out to communities that we don't reach out to and that we should, because we have incredible allies with them.
Mm-hmm. I think you have a comment.
Yeah, I was going to talk about, we at Oceana have been, connected to this Ocean Justice Project. Mm-hmm. And to piggyback on what Catherine is saying is that it is about, we do all this protection for the ocean and all of the species, and once that is done, who gets the benefit of that? Does everybody in coastal communities have equal access and equal opportunity to access the resource and the ocean itself? Just a quick anecdote. My mother, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, third generation. My mother graduated from a segregated high school. Those of us who go to high school, we know that, you go on your senior trip. My mother's senior trip was to a segregated beach on Jekyll Island, and she could only enjoy maybe a beach about the size, the beach about the size of this stage. And so who is this justice for? Who has access? Who can engage it? I remember during the first couple of months of COVID, I had turned 53, so that's how young I am. Mm-hmm. And so my mother, my sisters, about 20 of my family members from Atlanta came to the coast. Many of my nieces and nephews have never, ever seen the ocean, so it was just an experience for them. But we were en masse, 20-something people deep, and this white woman stopped and said, "Where y'all think y'all going?" And I'm like, "I'm going to the beach. I have a right to go on the beach. I belong on the beach." So it's these kinds of experiences that still exist. Here she is thinking that, what right do you have on this beach? It belongs to all of us. I belong anywhere I enter. My nieces and nephews and my 2 granddaughters belong. And so when we talk about marine biodiversity and all of this, the diversity just in general of who we are as humans, who we are as people living this experience. If we can understand marine biodiversity, how come we can't understand just social biodiversity of people?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's critically, the whole concept of taking up space.
Absolutely.
And being present is something that I think is powerful right now in this moment. Yeah. This question did have a component about food and technology as well in terms of accessibility with prices of foods, prices of technologies, access to internet and so forth. And I'm not sure if any of you all had any comments on how we can think or how you all are trying to think creatively about accessibility in these times as well.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the slogan of Running Tide is kill Godzilla, heal the ocean, eat more oysters.
Okay. Can you say that one more time a little slower?
Kill Godzilla,
okay.
Heal the ocean,
okay.
Eat more oysters. And so I'll break it down for you. Kill Godzilla, Godzilla represents the problem. I actually saw a wonderful thing on Twitter where it was Godzilla behind New York yesterday with all the orange smoke. And Godzilla represents the problem. It's something external. We all face it. It's coming after us. We have to tackle it together, right? It's not your fault. It's not my fault. We just have to work together because there's this thing coming for us, right? So it represents this, like, it's a metaphor. I mean, Godzilla originally was a metaphor for nuclear war, but it's this thing we've unleashed. We've unleashed this thing. We've done it together, so let's tackle it. Second thing is heal the ocean, right? Like, that's pretty straightforward. It's the kind of the hippier side of our company, but it's heal the ocean. That's the goal. Eat more oysters represents a world of abundance. The problem is, like, I live in New York now. New York used to be the oyster capital of the world. Oysters were the hot dogs of the day. You just drop a bucket down, put it on a cart, go sell it on the street. Like, it was the everyman's food. That was the thing, and you have this abundant natural resource that everyone could access. And so the eat more oysters represents, like, if we do our job, we have a world of abundance that people can access. Oysters are a delicacy that you eat rarely because they're very expensive. They're $1 for a little thing, right? Like, that is fundamentally wrong. Right? Like, we need to create more abundance so people can have access to these resources and access to food. And if we can tackle those things, if we can kill Godzilla, if we can heal the ocean, we can live in a world of abundance. And, like, that's kind of that's the point. And that in tackling the ocean in that way gives us a chance to do it because it's everywhere. It connects all of us. It's the story here. One of the things we were talking about before, we have a genetics team that works in St. Louis, which is very strange having an ocean team in St. Louis, but they were telling us that kelp is genetically more like us than kelp is like a tree, right? That we all come from that part, we all come from the ocean genetically, right? Eventually, at some point, you trace it all back, we all come from the ocean. So there's this really interesting, keep coming back to it, it's like if we can solve these things, if we can work together, we can actually have this world of abundance and we're all connected to it.
Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I also realized those are New York prices because in California oysters are $2 each. So.
That's happy hour prices.
Okay, all right.
But I'd also like to say I'm really proud of Oceana. We're in like 30 plus countries, but what he described in whether it be Peru or Chile or Philippines or any of our offices around the world, that is what we are facilitating for communities in other countries that certainly need this kind of protein in their diets, and that is what connects all of us. Oceana is solving the problem of food deficiency in countries around the world, and so I like what you said because we're all a part of this. I think that if we can understand that NOAA and EPA and all of these agencies, if we see these problems that somehow through these silos we can build these bridges that are solving problems in communities like Brunswick, Georgia. Brunswick, Georgia experiences severe flooding during, high tide, and it exacerbates the pollution from chemical plants that are already there. These weather patterns actually stir up that pollution, infiltrates farms and drinking water. And here we have this wonderful salt marsh that is absorbing as much as it can in terms of climate, but also, there's degradation from pollution. But if we could somehow get on one page, bridge these silos in some kind of ways, then I think that we can begin to see some real change in the lives of people.
Mm-hmm. I think that's critical. And one thing, just to follow up on that very quickly, one of the things, shout out to the Foundation's social media team, we found out is that Brazil is actually a huge contingency of who's looking at our content at the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And we don't have content in Portuguese, but there must be something that's resonating with people in these spaces. And so really the work you all are doing here at this level is resonating all around the world, and that's going to be some fruitful conversations as we move forward, I'm sure. Sorry.
No. This is a good conversation. I need to also come up with a snazzier tagline. I need something with a, Godzilla was a great representation. I liked it. I didn't know where you were going, to be honest with that at first.
Yeah, no, it's a little confusing at start. You have to explain it. Yeah.
Taking on the journey, and I was like, okay. No, I'm glad I actually had a moment, because I needed to figure out how I wanted to break this. This is a huge question apart. I mean, I think the first and most simple one is in terms of any new food, or just even in general food, like price parity and competitive pricing is really important, right? And there's a lot of conversation. I'm not going to be the first to start or finish this conversation around the price affordability of healthy and nutritious foods and their accessibility to all communities. That's a huge conversation. I know this administration is also working a lot on nutrition and accessibility and food justice and all that. So, but again, thinking about that in the role of new food technology, what is the role? It's making sure that foods are still going to be accessible, production's accessible, and that you meet price sort of expectations, or where prices competitively should fall. I think one thing that's exciting about this new technology in terms of seafood accessibility is it's geographically agnostic. So you could build these facilities in, Kansas. You could build them in the South. You could build them abroad. It's really access to workforce, but it's not like now where seafood is coming from the coast and access to fresh seafood is not equally distributed. But I think the meatier thing I wanted to mention, which is really relevant here, being a policy convening in DC, is really sort of the Farm Bill, which is also really timely, because I think T-1 or so 2 weeks until the portals close. But our policy ecosystem shapes the food system we have. And that's always been really interesting to me, because we have a social construct that dictates we've decided how our society is built in some ways. Not all of us have decided, but there's a system in place. And so I think in a lot of ways, solving a lot of these challenges comes back to looking at, if we want to see a future of food system that's different in years and years, or even tomorrow, we really need to look at what's creating that system. And in the United States, a huge piece of that's the Farm Bill. And so I was kind of always joking that I'm here at Capitol Hill Ocean Week talking about Farm Bill. But there's such a nexus, because seafood is food. The intersection of agriculture and a lot of these coastal ecosystems is very real, dead zones, et cetera. There's just such a nexus point. And so I think if we're going to talk about food accessibility and like fresh food accessibility and nutritious food and all that, it also goes back to the policy landscape. And I think a good starting place is really looking at the Farm Bill.
That's a good sort of intersection between the two. I'm also realizing too, there's a question here about COVID, and I know this was the first year we were able to bring back the fish fry that CHOW does annually, and that was my first time going, and it's a beautiful mixing of different types of foods, different cultural foods coming together around this idea of sustainable foods. And I'm wondering how COVID might have changed some of the ways that you all are operating in terms of community engagement or thinking creatively about technologies and foods and so forth. And if it's for the better, that's great. If there's new challenges that you're still trying to work through, that'd be interesting to learn as well.
I guess I can kick us off. Well, first of all, in most our facility has to be open all the time, because the cells need to be tended to survive, and we can't be like, see you in a week. And so we really did have to figure out what that looked like. and how did we make sure that the scientists were safe, and that we're in the Bay Area, so we were very rigorous in making sure that we were following all of the local requirements, but also ensuring that the scientific experimentation went forward. And especially being in a venture-backed environment and the race to the milestones, we wanted to make sure that we're still hitting our technical progress. So that was just logistical, but I definitely think it was something that our industry took quite seriously. Like, how do we ensure that we're safe, ensure that we're following the local jurisdictions, policies, and at the same time make sure that we're moving this forward. And it really was connected to the fact that it was also COVID, and in some ways, a lot of the funding coming into our industry is also because of what we've seen in the last 5 years. Food security, food supply chain disruptions. I feel like I can't go an hour without talking about climate resilient food systems. And so a lot of the interest in our industry is because we saw a brief glimpse of what was happening with our food systems and how we are, or frankly, are not prepared for the future and larger environmental disruptions. And so in a lot of ways, we had to figure out the logistics so we could continue the technical progress to create the industries we're going to need for more of what we were experiencing.
Yeah, for us, it was interesting. Before COVID, we were primarily an oyster for protein company. Unsurprisingly, when restaurants shut down, your market for oysters goes away. So the entire business, we built it around, a lot of investment into it. We were lucky enough that it kind of forced us to change course, right? We went to a more focus on restoration. We more focused on carbon removal. In part, our focus on carbon removal was seeing what was happening in our oyster reefs. We saw acidification directly impacting our oyster growth, right? And because we had the sensors and the capability to understand it, we could see pH change, oyster health decline directly through our machine vision system, and okay, we can make this calculation. These events are not just local; they are all connected to the global. So if we're ever going to have a sustainable food system, we have to be able to solve the global problem. Right? So it really forced us to really look at what we're doing and say, how do we apply this technology to apply our approach to a broader global problem? And the second thing that it did to us was it opened us up as a remote company, functionally, right? I exist in part because of that. But also, we opened up a science job recently, a PhD level job. It's 700 applications in 2 weeks because it's a remote science job. And it gives access to people who normally wouldn't have access to an ocean science, and it's a plant-based ocean science job, so you're getting people from the Midwest and all over the country, and that's when you open the space up to how you think about it, and to your approach to the ocean, but also to open your space up to who can be a part of the conversation and a part of the company and part of the journey. You start to see different things, pockets. You can learn from them in different ways. And so those are the two big shifts. I've never really thought about it that way, but those are the two big shifts we saw.
Yeah, I kind of see two things to that. One, I think COVID meant that a lot of youth was online all the time because most of our schools were online. So I know something I've been kind of reflecting on and something I've had a couple conversations with people about is when we were online, it was really boring. And because of that, it had us begin to seek out stuff to keep us entertained, stuff to keep us kind of busy. So a lot of us started finding opportunities in that, and a lot of us started kind of exploring our passions, and social media had a huge play on that. There's a lot going on during the time, and it led a lot of young people into the advocacy space, and especially environmental advocacy. And I've talked to a lot of people that started kind of joining the environmental advocacy space around COVID and finding online resources and online webinars and online communities that cared about the issues that they cared about and wanted to have those conversations maybe for the first time. Not a lot of South Dakotans are talking about oceans all the time and ocean conservation, right? But because of the internet, you can go on any online forum on ocean conservation and learn all these things from all these people that might have direct experience that you might have never gotten if not that. And now coming out of COVID, we are kind of returning to, in-person events. And with that, there's also the challenge of are these young people going to keep being engaged in these issues? And I think there's a lot to be said about keeping young people engaged in the way that they were in COVID when they had that extra time. Now it's a barrier of, okay, we've set up this foundation. Some young people are interested. We've done that work. They've either sought us out or we found them, but how do we keep them retained and engaged in this conversation and continue stressing not only the urgency, but how they can be actionable and help their community. I think a lot of that comes in when you teach young people how to work in their communities. I think it becomes so much better for young people to be invested in issues when they are talking about them and are actively being reminded about them and are actively having conversations. So I think preparing young people for that and actively engaging with them and teaching them how to engage with others about these issues and others that may have never heard of these issues is super, super crucial, especially to tackle more online organizations that found all these people through COVID and keeping these young people and retaining kind of their expertise and knowledge and communities.
For us, it was critical to continue to engage communities during COVID, using digital technology, Zoom, engaging with communities. I'm a senior field representative at Oceana, and so engaging with grassroots and grass-top leaders is very critical to the work that I do. It speaks to our drive for excellence in who we are, but also in how we get the work done. For the field team, we were engaging community leaders, grass tops, as well as elected officials via Zoom. We have a project called Ocean Stewardship Spotlight, where we would engage leaders across the country, around the world, and their experiences as ocean stewards. And then there was another project that we had been engaged in, and it was Keep Oceans Fishy. Who are these local fisher people? Who are these people who sustain the ocean and communities and are willing to speak as stakeholders to inform elected officials about what that constituent population desires for them to do in terms of policy. And so that is a way that we continue to work successfully throughout COVID, is by creating programs in which we, COVID, of course, was, a huge challenge, but because we are engaged with communities, one of the big things for me is listening. Listening is very revolutionary now. And so I listen to community members. When the Shark Fin Cells Elimination Act passed, I was about to conduct earlier this year, I was about to conduct a videotaped story with a local fisher person in McIntosh County, and he was so excited because I was really there to talk about North Atlantic right whales. He's been a fisherman for about 30 years. He's talked about how much he's seen these whales. He talked about, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and he understands, how many feet to stay back and all of that kind of stuff. And so I love that kind of engagement. So I get to his establishment on the coast in McIntosh County, and this was before the actual bill passed. And so we're talking about his experiences and listening. I learned so much from, what they do. He was on the wrong side of, protecting North Atlantic right whales. When it came time for us to actually publish, his story, he was like, y'all didn't come out on the right side. We're always science-based. You didn't come out on the right side. But engaging communities around, their storytelling abilities, those two programs, Keep Ocean Fishy and Ocean Stewardship Spotlight, are how we got through COVID and continuing to build advocacy for our, wonderful campaigns here in the U.S. and abroad.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Thank you. I want to close this out with one last question, and we have time, so you all feel free to elaborate. I didn't know Margaret Davidson personally, but I was able to speak with some folks in the hallways, and they said one thing working with her, she would always ask people, what is your 5-year plan? I heard we had crickets in the room, that's a little scary. So I want to give you all some time to think about it, but what would you all say your 5-year plan is? And it's okay not to have an answer. I know we're trying to get to tomorrow, but thinking if you could strategically forward in terms of the work you're doing now, where do you all see yourselves in 5 years? Where do you see your organizations in 5 years? Where do you see your communities in 5 years?
I see communities on the Georgia coast more resilient than ever. I'm very hopeful about the future in terms of what we do to protect the ocean, which in turn protect people. The kind of resilience that will inform people about how to live peacefully and harmoniously with the ocean, as well as how to become informed and active and very impactful when it comes to how the ocean is really impacting their lives. Before coming here, I connected with 12 leaders in all of the 6 coastal counties, just a cursory qualitative research. What are the 2 top climate issues that you have in each of your coastal counties? Number 1, of course, was flooding. Number 2 was infrastructure. I hope that as we do this work, that we will inform politicians about the kind of resilience that communities need in order to be sustainable, in order to live a joyful life. There's that Indian proverb is that we don't use our lives for our ancestors, but we borrow it from the future. There are communities that are dying, and they're dying because they don't understand. And they're also dying because our freaking politicians are not protecting them. And so it goes back to that same ocean justice. Who's being protected? These communities, what does it take, Katrina? Does it take lives to be lost? Not just with, fisheries and migrating birds, but people. So the kind of coastal resilience that is needed on the Georgia coast, I am hopeful that we're going to work together and that we're going to ensure that not only is, the kind of marine biodiversity and fisheries are thriving, but that people continue to thrive. And we're going to be a part of that solution.
Hard-hitting questions. I think I've been so inspired by everything I've learned here at CHOW this week, and something that I've really taken away is that it seems like this space is really opening up to new voices and diverse voices and voices that haven't been represented. And in the next 5 years, I sincerely hope that continues. And I hope we continue bringing new people to this fold, new people to this conversation, because they need to be represented, and that connection needs to be made. And for us to go inland, for us to reach immigrant communities, for us to rethink who needs to be a part of this conversation, is us expanding, is us investing, is us innovating. And I hope that in the next 5 years, we see that continue, and we see new investments, new innovations. And to all the leaders of whatever spaces or roles you currently hold, I hope that you value that, and I hope that you see that there is so much prosperity to be found in these new experiences, in these new groups, in these new people. If they haven't been reached out to, that means we need to be reaching out to them and letting them hear what your work is, and making that connection between them and their lives and their experiences and their communities and how the ocean is going to affect them. Because, you know, this whole week has been the ocean climate connection. We all know that we're all so interrelated with all of these issues, and it might take a little bit more of work. It might take a little bit more of, you know, it's not always going to be super easy or intuitive, but that's okay because we're here to fight a fight, and I think it's not always going to be easy, and we need to expand.
I wanted to give you all a chance to, if you had 5-year plans.
You know, this is funny. This is the interview question everyone tells you to prepare for.
Yeah.
Then I've been telling folks, just know what you want to do, not what it needs to look like. And now I'm getting this question. I'm like, maybe that was wrong advice. No, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, what I hope I do is what I hope the space does. I think I really personally want to continue to be a systems change person who pushes the boundaries of what those solutions look like. In a lot of ways, I think it took me many years to figure out that I'm a builder mentality, and I want to build the things that don't exist yet that I know we need, even if at times it's unpopular, or at times it's not the things we want to talk about, or the vision's not fully realized or seen yet. So I think that that's what I hope for the industry I'm working in currently is not only just as a company, but as an industry, that we start really demonstrating the realized potential of innovation and have folks realize that some of these innovative solutions we need to be invested in now, so they're going to be there for when we need them, very sincerely. In a lot of ways, I think of that rising tide lifts all boats mentality. And I think that's why as an industry, we really work together, because we know, like, it's not you versus me versus you, but we're only going to succeed at this greater mission if we work together. And I actually think in the policy space it's relevant. There was just some news about, you know, moving away from like antitrust in the terms of ESG and climate, because there needs to be another dialogue of how we work together on like the issues that affect greater humanity. I think that is exactly what I hope for the industry, or this space, because I think in a lot of ways we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to, you know, pick the perfect solution or know all the solutions today, or before we even invest in what they're going to be, know exactly how it's going to play out. And I think we really need to take an all hands on deck approach, community solutions, like innovative technology solutions, innovative policy solutions, which I've always said exist, even sometimes I think folks don't think innovation and policy go together, but innovative policy solutions, I think we need all of those in the dialogue, because there's no one sort of golden bullet answer or silver bullet answer here right now. It's going to be a mix of all of them, but we really need to invest in them today, because 5 years from now seems short, but we actually don't have that many years further than 5 years from now in terms of climate. So I think we really just need to, in some ways, be okay throwing spaghetti at the wall and figure out, like, how do we then continue investing in the thing that sticks?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to take us home at the
Yeah, I'll be real quick. So to kill Godzilla, heal the ocean so we can all eat more oysters, we've got to rebalance the carbon cycle. Mm-hmm. That means roughly 10 billion tons of carbon that we have to move from the fast carbon cycle to the slow carbon cycle every year. Largest mass transfer exercise in human history. We are currently doing less than 10,000 tons a year. Roughly 32 million tons gets absorbed into the ocean every single day because of emissions. So in 5 years, I'd like to bias one day. So I'd like to be removing at least 32 million tons. Like, that's kind of like, you know, again, that's still one day. One day. And so it's very ambitious. It's kind of insane, but that's what we are up against, right? But we can't do that without policy frameworks that understand that we have to positively engage with the ocean. Let's be honest, it's easier to have a negative impact on the ocean than it is to have a positive impact on the ocean. Mm-hmm. So we have to build the policy frameworks, and the science is going to be there. The technology will be there. It's already mostly there, right? It's just about building the policy frameworks to make that possible. So 5 years, it's 32 million tons. That's kind of my goal.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you all for sharing the space with us. Thank you all for coming here, and most importantly, thank you all for the work that you all are doing. And please, let's give a round of applause to the panel.
The only bias is in 1 day.
Yeah, 1 day. That's just 1 day in the ocean.
Thank you all. This is why we have you as our leaders. And being able to bring everyone together and have that be how we leave this is truly an important piece and how we want to make sure we are moving these pieces forward. These discussions are a spark. They're a start. And so on World Oceans Day, we do want to celebrate some of the things that we've heard so far. We want to make this World Oceans Month, World Oceans Year, decade, just the start. But I did want to mention a few of the things across our community that we've heard over even the past week. We've heard the administration announce $2.6 billion in climate resilience, coastal community, frontlines community investments. We don't have to clap for all of them, but I want to make sure we say this. The White House Council for Environmental Quality announced that they are kicking off the development of their first ever U.S. Ocean Justice Strategy. We've seen a number of pieces of legislation introduced or reintroduced focused on how we can look at healthy oceans, healthy communities, blue economy, and centering our communities in those pieces. We've seen introduction of the Blue Energy Innovation Act, a bill that looks at ocean innovation clusters and technology development, Clean Shipping Act. We've looked at legislation that would amend the Federal Ocean Acidification Research and Monitoring Act. And we've seen new legislation on the Regional Opportunity and Innovation Act. And those are just some of the ones that I've heard about. I know there are others, we're still tracking those down, but these are big pieces to be able to start moving that ball and those discussions forward. And I hope sincerely that everyone here and everyone virtually is going to find ways to participate and to be heard in those discussions as they move forward by our policymakers, and that hopefully our policymakers also take to heart what we have heard from so many of our advocates here today, is that we need to be part of those discussions, and we cannot reuse the same communications methods moving forward. We have to have engagement and true engagement. I want to also mention a couple of the partner announcements that we've heard. So we've heard the first turbine blades for Vineyard Wind arriving in New Bedford in Massachusetts. Our partners at Hispanic Access Foundation released their Ocean and Coastal Protection Toolkit, looking at how we can engage more Latino communities in ocean conservation. And we've also seen a coalition of environmental groups working on ocean climate action, releasing their report for the Biden administration on progress in implementing ocean-based climate solutions. These are only a few of the pieces we've seen, but it's only a couple of days, and I am hopeful that we will continue to see more announcements, more action, more engagement when it comes to ocean climate action from everyone, every corner of the world as well. So with that, I do want to take a moment and actually thank many of the people who make this conference possible. I've mentioned we have amazing sponsors who make sure that they support this work so that we can make sure this stays free, open to the public, and we think every year about how we can make this a more inclusive and accessible conversation for everyone, both in person as well as virtually, so that we can have these conversations together around the world. I'd also like to thank each and every one of our speakers this year, our panelists. They are the experts, they are the leaders, and we want to see more and more voices like these. So always, please thank them, but also reach out as we are continuing to look at these conversations time and again. I want to thank the staff here at our amazing venue. Being back in person is amazing, and the Ronald Reagan Building has been a great home for us. They've made sure that we have what it takes to make sure that everyone can be a part of these conversations, as well as our event producers, Pre-Con Events, who have been very, very helpful in making sure that we have every piece of this together. And finally, I want to mention and thank our Board of Trustees at the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation and our amazing staff at the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation who help organize Capitol Ocean Week every year, the Ocean Awards Gala, as well as our Hill Day. Every single year, the work that we do is to make sure that we can bring more and more voices together. It takes a village, and they're working tirelessly, endlessly, to think about every facet and how we can make it better. And so I want to thank them, because it really is a year in work. We're already talking about CHOW 2024, folks. So thank you for them. I want to just say, with that appreciation, each and every one of you, I want to have the pleasure of actually meeting every one of you in person at some point. I hope that I can do that throughout this week, but I also hope that I can see you again next year for CHOW 2024 here next June in Washington, D.C. So with that, my gratitude to each and every one of you. And I hope that you put us on your books and we can see where we are in another year. But let's continue these conversations so that there is more and more each and every year. Thank you.